Having talked with hundreds of parents about ADHD diagnosis and the natural ways to help it, there's still a lot of confusion if a child actually has ADHD. What are the causes? How can we help them without medication? These are questions that parents give us on the daily. So in this video, I want to answer a lot of those questions. We want to look at ADHD through a different lens than just the diagnosis, just the symptoms, just the output. We want to unpack it to really see how the brain and nervous system influence these systems of the body that bring about the attention, focus, impulse control, hyperactivity, all of those struggles, to really go back to that main root cause that can make sense to help them find the answers to really address these difficulties. And I really want to do this through a lens where we look at it, how do we help the body to make this into more of a superpower than a struggle? Because here's the truth of it. A lot of kids that are the go-getters, the go kids, the kids that are just in it to win it, if you will, that can't sit still, that's actually something that's going to help them later in life, right? To be motivated, to accomplish great things, but we've got to help them to be able to do it within the right limits. So before that, I want to look at some eye-opening stats that go with ADHD. This will blow your mind. In fact, right now, I think this was just a couple-year-old study, they estimated that 6 million children in the US alone struggle or have been diagnosed. Actually, no, this would be diagnosed with ADHD. That's roughly 9.4%, almost 10% of children in the US get diagnosed with ADHD. Now, that is an increase of 42% from 2011. Now, these numbers, they're staggering. It's crazy to me to think that. But what's truly concerning is that many of these children are prescribed medication that go along with that diagnosis at that first line of treatment. Now, that's not really looking at, okay, what are the other maybe more conservative options? So that's what I want to talk about today. The alternative approaches if you don't want to go medication first. Now, the good news is here with PwC Chiropractic and the pxdocs platform, we're seeing a growing trend of parents that are seeking more drug-free solutions that really go to this root cause. So in this video, I want to talk about really 7 steps that I'll call it, that'll help you really understand ADHD better, know how to help your kiddos, and then get to the other side of it. And then, like I mentioned before, truly make it into a superpower, because not all of those characteristics are bad. And the last thing we want to do as parents is fully govern everything and really suppress everything with a medication. So first things first, there's a lot of different types of ADHD. You know, you might have heard it in the literature called ADD, ADHD, different titles on it. But really, I don't want to look at it as just what's diagnosis or what's the test, because it's never one size fits all. You know, I want to look at really how the body looks at it, and each presents differently because each requires a customizable approach. There's these kiddos that struggle more with the raging bull in a china shop, want to go hyperactive, can't start moving, you know, screens will calm them, sports will calm them, movement will calm them, but that's about it. And then there's the opposite of that, where the kiddos are maybe a little more just unfocused, maybe a little more inattentive. Maybe there's not the hyperactive side of it, or the I've got to keep moving. It's just, you know, like I've been called this sometimes in the doc meetings at PwC as, am I a space cadet? Am I distracted, right? It happens to all of us when we're focused on different things. So there's different kinds of ADHD, and it's so important to really hone in on those. And that's where it leads me to number 2. ADHD isn't just that busy, overwhelmed brain. Now, it can be an overwhelmed brain, but it's most often because the body is what's making the brain be overwhelmed. I want to unpack this a little bit. The body and the brain are intricately connected. So everything sensory coming from the environment can cause our central nervous system to affect it and cause it to be in fight or flight mode. The question most parents have with ADHD is, where is this stress, this fight or flight, this protective response really coming from? You know, and a lot of times we think of, okay, It's the stress coming from our external environment. So we change, we give kids the wobble boards, we help kiddos focus, we give them the plans for it in school. But there's actually a process internally where if stress is coming from our sensory systems internally, that's telling our brain, hey, things need to go really fast, things need to be stressful. That can actually cause our internal environment to really react to our external environment in a way more hyperbolic state that's going to cause us to even be more affected by what's around us. Now, here's what parents ask really of how this happens. And you've got to go back for this into children's development, baby's development. So all the way back, because that's where the root cause goes here. High stress and high risk pregnancy can put mom and baby into more of a sympathetic dominant state. Now, what that does is it shifts them more into fight or flight and protective state. This is why you see kiddos that struggle more with colic, with constipation, with lack of sleep. They're actually more in a sympathetic state very, very early on. It didn't just start when they hit, kindergarten, first grade, second grade. This has been something that's presenting differently early on. Now, what really takes us to another level that we found in our practice is birth intervention. So if there's been a difficult birth with forceps, vacuum, C-section, induction, one that places a lot more physical stress, commonly in the upper neck, shoulders, in this area of neurology, that's going to overwhelm neuromotor development even more. Now that makes kiddos more uncoordinated, more antsy, or they feel like they have to move, and that's what really calms the brain. This is why ADHD in older kids, they're the kids that want to move a lot. They're the kids that want a lot of stimulation. They're the kiddos that in class, they're like, Mom, I'm just bored. I get the answer so quickly that then I can't sit still after it. It's actually because their nervous system is more stuck in a sympathetic state. So you see this go on with kids, and they might be more fussy or colicky as an infant. Again, that sympathetic tone is really overwhelming the autonomic nervous system. The autonomics are what control our sleep, our digestion, our breathing. So a lot of times babies or toddlers will struggle with that. And then the next phase, we actually see it hit more the immune system. This is why these kids struggle more with ear infections, respiratory infections before the age of 3. And then if you add antibiotics onto that, and you really start to suppress that brain-gut connection that happens with the vagus nerve, the nervous system gets overtaxed, overworked, and that perfect storm comes together with those 4 stressors. The signals that are sent to the brain are on full protective, full fight or flight response in every area. Now, this is where the cerebellum comes into play. This back part of the brain, which is the motor sensors, take all that information in, and then it causes kiddos not to be able to sit still. That midbrain or that limbic system that's just right above the cerebellum, that actually gets all the feedback from that cerebellum, and that actually affects our focus, attention, and everything in it. It's actually that area of the brain that puts us more in that fight or flight or fear, that midbrain portion. Now, if that's in fight or flight or fear, then the upper brain, the prefrontal cortex, can't get enough signals. This is, what affects socialization, situational awareness, the ability to self-regulate and calm and interact. Those are all frontal brain. Those are all higher levels of the brain. But if we're stuck more with movement in the cerebellum, if we're stuck more in this amygdala, limbic system, midbrain area that is stressed and in fear, the signals can't get up to that prefrontal cortex to help everything calm. Now, my third point, ADHD is not just hyperactivity. Like I talked about first, it can be an overwhelmed body and brain that can cause brain fog, focus, attention. You can actually get overwhelmed, exhausted, and go slow from ADHD. Especially if it's not addressed, it can cause a huge energy drain for our kids. This is actually where you see in the progression, kiddos that are kindergarten, first grade, second grade present with a ton of hyperactivity or movement, and then you see them in high school and it actually becomes more of a demotivation or a depression side of it, where their nervous system just can't get up for the challenge because they're more exhausted and tired. See, when the sympathetic system, that midbrain, that limbic system, is stuck in fight or flight for a long time, high energy, low sleep, constant stress, it eventually burns out. It demotivates, it gets you tired, and then it's the grumpiness. It's, I got 4 boys, and it's where, you wake your toddler up from a nap too early and they are stressed. The same is true for a middle schooler or a high schooler that gets home from school and they have been stressed all day. They're going to be set off very quickly because they are grumpy, they are moody, they are tired, just like that toddler. But they're not as easily going to go settle down for that nap. They're going to fight you on it. And that's oftentimes how we see behaviors come in. Now, number 4, a lot of you, if you've been down this world of going to the root cause of ADHD, you probably looked at the role of genetics. Now, yes, genetics can influence these behaviors, right? How many of us have said with our kids, be like, man, they are behaving exactly like I would. But here's the truth of it. It's not nearly as much as we think. See, some neurologists and scientists have looked at it and said, there's about a 15% genetic imprint of that. In fact, Dr. Bruce Lipton, he's a PhD biologist who studies epigenetics. He estimated that no more than that 15% actually impacts our genetic code. So that means 85% is more the environment, and it's up to us. So it's influenced not only by that external environment that you as parents are working so hard to help these kids calm, but it's also the internal environment, the sensory system that's fueling, like I talked about, that cerebellum and midbrain. Now, you might look at this and be like, well, if it's not genetic, then what is it? Actually take that as incredibly encouraging news. That means that even though dad or mom, I might struggle with it, our kids won't, and they don't have to. So if your child's struggling with this, they've maybe gone through all the traditional tests. How do we test for it? Now, these traditional tests, they often focus solely on the symptoms. They're taking long questionnaires. They're looking at a lot of different things. But here at PwC Chiropractic and in all PX offices, we want to go deeper. We use what we call insight neurological scans. Now, they allow us to measure the exact amount of dysfunction, distress, energy, and disorganization within the central and autonomic nervous systems. Now, this is important because this is that internal environment that I talked about. This is going to give us a clear picture of what's really going on in the body and then what's fueling the brain. So, for example, in the classic bull in the china shop ADHD case, we might use these scans on a kiddo and they're little sensors that go on their back, and we're going to check it all the way up, all the way through their neurospinal system to see what's going into the cerebellum and that midbrain. We find kiddos that actually have double the amount of energy, tension, and distress in key areas that are actually overfueling the brain. Now, these metrics, when they're almost double, tell us so much more than a checklist, because if this kiddo is trying to settle down, they're trying to sleep, they're trying to do homework, they're not going to be able to settle down because their brain is just getting so much information. In fact, we look at these scans and we find these same kiddos that struggle with all that tension, all that distress that are fueling their cerebellum. They often have higher heart rates. They often have, more jittery movements. They can't sit still. So there's a lot of these softer signs that you can see where the body is fueling the brain and it's really overwhelming it internally. Now, to address the root cause, instead of just trying to treat the symptoms, we have to focus on the internal aspect of that. Now, when that's stuck and out of balance in that nervous system, to get to the root cause, that's how you create the lasting change. So within those scans, within that energy that I talked about that we're seeing that's fueling the brain, we have to know where it's coming from. If we can find out where it's coming from, then we can target it and then we can calm it. This is where care comes in, where we look at personalized care plans. We want to look at these scans and say, okay, here's where a child is more stressed. Did they have a difficult birth? Did they have a difficult development? Was there a lot of prematernal stress that influenced that environment, that 85% of it that caused them to be more stressed? And where is that coming from? Is it more in the upper neck? Is it more in the shoulders? Is it more in the neurology of the lungs, the gut, all of those things? That's going to allow us to really look carefully and put a plan together that's customized for your child that says, here's what they need work on. And what you'll see in that is you'll actually see kiddos conquering the softer signs first, where they're sleeping a little bit better. They might be digesting a little bit better. They're breathing better. They're able to kick immune function better, because all of these things are interconnected by way of the nervous system. And if we find where that system is struggling, that's going to impact the symptom long term. Now, we know that medication has its place, But we also want you to be able to explore drug-free options first, because the truth of it is, most of the time, it's the other way around. The medication comes first. Now, our approach, we want to look at that brain function naturally. So if we can eliminate that internal stress, it gives you another variable that you can take down, where then maybe it eliminates the need for medication in many places. This is why we work with parents, is if you want to eliminate medication, if you're already on medication and it's just not working all the way, we want to help look at that internal environment. And most importantly, we really want to reframe ADHD. It's not just a disorder. And I know parents, you've probably felt that. It's a different way of processing information from the environment, from the internal nervous system into the brain. See, when it can be properly managed, when it can be worked through efficiently with a kiddo, it can actually lead to incredible creativity, productivity, and really success. I always like to think of it is the kiddos that, have struggled with this, they're the kiddos that are going to grow up to be the entrepreneurs, the go-getters, the leaders, because they are so driven. We just have to help them do that in the right way. The analogy I love to use is, if you're driving a Corvette and you're driving a fancy sports car that goes really, really fast, but you can't take it around that tight turn, you don't have the brake pedal to take it around that tight turn, you're going to struggle, right? But the last thing we want to do as a parent is really trade that awesome sports car in for something that's maybe not as fast. Maybe like, if you have a Ford Focus or a minivan, nothing wrong with that. I have a minivan at home. We have 4 kids. We need it. But you want to keep that sports car because that's got an incredible amount of speed, quickness, and it's just awesome. So wouldn't you rather put better brakes in or better control of that sports car rather than have to trade it in or govern it all the way down? And this is why we want kiddos to have that cheat code, to keep that sports car, to keep that creativity, that productivity, and then experience success in that way without having to govern the whole system. So if you're feeling held back by ADHD, a diagnosis, and if you're a parent that's just watching your child struggle, we want you to take action. Just don't let another day go by with them feeling overwhelmed, misunderstood. Check out our website, give us a call. We want to look at those insight neurological scans because that lets us get to the root cause of the symptoms within the systems of the body. And let us look at that personalized plan because we want them to be able to utilize that as a superpower and just thrive and be effective throughout whatever they're going through. So I hope this message finds you well. I hope it answered a lot of your questions about an alternative way to look at ADHD to give you more options and alternatives. So if you have more questions, we would love it if you send us a direct message, comment on this video, check out the pxdocs platform. There's a lot more articles on this that explain exactly how we look at it through the nervous system and how that really fuels the brain. So we would love to help, and we're here for you. Take care. God bless, guys.